proposal, just go to journal.code4lib.org, hit the Call for Proposals button, and let us know your thoughts. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to get started, and I'm not actually going to do the introduction because I'm sure I would fumble through it. So, are you going up there? Oh, you're already going up there to do the introduction. Okay, so let's get this party started.
Why not? Thanks, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tennant. I'm a Senior Program Officer with OCLC Research. Really honored this morning to be able to interview our second keynote speaker, Valerie Aurora. But before I introduce her, there's a little bit of housekeeping I need to do first. Although we considered taking questions through various online methods, we decided that, first of all, the network really wasn't that trustworthy, and also it's very hard for me to monitor multiple streams. So the way we're handling questions is there's index cards on all the tables. If you have a question, please write it there, pass it up to the front, and someone will get it to me. Also, we have someone monitoring Twitter for those who are watching the live stream. So the way to ask a question via Twitter is to use the conference hashtag C4L14, and the person who's monitoring that will then write down your question and get it to us. But finally, we can't really guarantee we're going to get all the questions answered. So keep that in mind. We'll do our best, but we also, have a limited amount of time here today. So please bear that in mind. So with that, I'm really delighted to introduce Valerie Aurora. Valerie Aurora is the Executive Director of the ADA Initiative, which she co-founded in 2011 with Mary Gardner. The ADA Initiative is dedicated to increasing the participation and status of women in open technology and culture, which includes open source software, Wikipedia, open data, fan fiction, and similar areas. Before the ADA Initiative, Valerie was a full-time software engineer for over a decade, working mainly on Linux file systems and other software. Also, she has assured me that her hair color changes frequently. So, Valerie, to begin, please tell us about your career path and how you got involved in feminist activism.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I went to a small state college in New Mexico, which for some reason at that time had a program in open source, a couple of professors doing Linux kernel development. So that's how I got started in open source. A few years after I graduated and I had a job doing this, in about 2002, I started to wonder if I was the only woman Linux kernel developer in the entire world. Because at that time we didn't meet up in person very often, and I was just going off the names on the mailing list. I wasn't sure. So I did some research for a couple of weeks, and I concluded that I could only find one other woman who had written code in the past for the Linux kernel, and she was no longer doing so. At this point, I couldn't really ignore that there was something keeping women out of open source software. So I joined the group Linux Chicks, CHIX, a naming decision regretted for many years afterwards. Don't name your group Chicks. Please don't do that, even if it has an X just like the first word. And I joined the IRC channel, which I love that I can say IRC channel in this room, and actually started crying into my keyboard because I didn't realize how strange and weird I felt until that moment that I was talking to other women interested in Linux. So I continued working with my job as software development and my hobby as feminist activism for about, I guess that would be 9 years. And then a friend of mine got groped at an open source conference for the third time in 1 year. And I couldn't take it any longer. I couldn't encourage women to go into a field where I knew that they would suffer both verbal and physical harassment. So I sent an email out to a bunch of my friends, and Mary Gardner was foolish enough to reply, and we founded the ADA Initiative.
Great. As you know, although women are in the majority in librarianship, when it comes to library technology jobs, men are more prevalent. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, Yeah, so this is starting out with the softball question, not. One of the things I really like about getting to know the library technology community better and working more with you all is that this context of librarianship being mostly or female-dominated overall, but the technology section being male-dominated, brings out, it makes things more obvious, right? That we can't wander around claiming that women have some genetic predisposition to librarianship, but somehow that goes away as soon as you put a computer next to it. Yeah. So it brings out this, what Lisa Wade has called the fractal gender binary, or fractal sexism. And there's going to be a tweet on Ada Initiative coming out shortly with a link to this article. That as you zoom in on any particular area of human endeavor, you're going to find within that area there's the female thing and the male thing as defined by society. And when you go farther into the female thing, you're going to find there's a male part of it that's considered male and a female part of it. You look at nursing and you see the same sort of thing going on. Mm-hmm. Nursing is currently female dominated, although hilariously, if you look at the history of medical nurses, it was claimed for a long time that women were incapable of nursing because they were not strong enough to set a broken leg, or whatever the arguments are at any given time. But today it is. When you look at nursing management, it becomes more and more male as you go up the hierarchy. So I believe that librarian technology really shows you the influence of this, the status that is afforded to technology technology areas, and the gatekeeping that occurs around that to make sure it stays high status. So we got to make sure we keep out the other people who are not like the people who are already in power. And there's a variety of ways of doing that, not having good documentation, having terrible user interface, all these things.
Well, I thought there was another reason for that, which was just we hate to document things and all of that. But yeah.
That's a funny thing. As a writer, I thought I would be a writer when I would grow up. I think that if we afforded greater status to writing in this situation, we would get better documentation.
Right. So does that lead to what you might call a technocracy, do you think?
Yes. I'm here to smash the technocracy. So it's not about moving people around within this hierarchy that produces inefficiency and abuse and discrimination. It's about flattening that hierarchy and trying to take away the power imbalances that make that possible. So it's an ironic thing, and unfortunately this is how it happens, is part of the reason I can be successful is that I was at the top of the technocracy when I was working on Linux kernel file system development, which in the fractal zoom in of technology is a very male occupation. So people keep adding that into my introduction. I'm like, oh yes, I used to do that thing that was hard. So.
Yeah. I want to spend a little bit more time on the status thing, because as you know, some positions in libraries are afforded a lot more status than others. Like if you're a children's librarian, you're not really paid all that well, and that's often seen as a female position. But when you get to systems librarian, they often are paid much higher and tend to be male dominated. So is there more that needs to be done than simply just getting more women into systems? Is there a different way at this issue?
Absolutely. So I was incredibly fortunate that to have the co-founder, Mary Gardner, our first meeting about the Ada Initiative was the day after her son's first birthday. And so she's sitting there juggling him while we're writing down the budget for the Ada Initiative. So it's been, from the beginning, a goal of ours to restructure these jobs to make it possible for people who are primary caretakers of children to take part in this thing. Technology makes it possible to work flexibly from home, right? And that goes in the other direction as well, that we need to raise the status of childcare and have that be something spread out more equally across society. And that those two pressures are coming in and influencing librarianship and what's considered higher status and lower status coming in from the outside. So yeah, part of our mission is to continually be raising the status of the jobs that women already do in technology, to acknowledge that that job you're doing is a technical job. This job you're doing involving the care and raising of our next generation of people, that is important.
Yeah, definitely. I want to remind people that you can ask questions too, so be sure to write down on those index cards, get them passed up here, and someone will get them to me, as well as the virtual people via Twitter. So, as a white man, especially recently, I've become much more aware of my privilege in society. Given your experience with developing and giving a workshop for allies or men like me who are becoming aware of their privilege and want to use it for good, what are some ways that we can get in touch with what our privilege actually means and how to act appropriately given that knowledge?
I love this question. And I will try not to go on too long. I made myself notes, so.
Listen up, people.
Which is exactly my first point, is listening when people speak about their experiences, which means that you can't be talking at that same time. My co-founder, Mary Gardner, gave a keynote speech at Wikimania 2012, which is the worldwide conference for Wikipedia and related projects. And she somehow managed to put in a slide that said, literally, shut up and listen. And put it in a way that the entire audience was like, hooray, shut up and listen, yes. So I don't have that talent. But yeah, that's the first step, is to stop talking and listen for a while. Part of listening well is consciously improving the diversity of what the information you take in. So I at one point saw the advice we were telling other people to, and yay, a room where everyone's on Twitter, maybe not everyone, but Twitter is a tool that you all use. And to look at the people you're following and to see, are they all the same in particular ways? Are they mostly one gender? Are they mostly one race? Are they mostly located in one area? And try consciously to find and follow these people who are different. Time zone is hard, but I've managed to get a few people in radically different time zones that I can read their tweets fairly often. So that's a good start. While you're doing this, and of course you can do that with blogs and other forms of media, while you're doing this, notice when you feel discomfort or guilt when you're reading one of these new people that you're following. That's a sign that you're learning something. All too often the response to that is to be angry, to talk, to reply, to demand explanations. If you can feel that feeling of discomfort or guilt and then go with it and research it, that will take you a long way. That takes you on to using Google effectively. There's this funny thing that when you say an unfamiliar phrase in social justice context, like cis man, CIS, people suddenly lose the ability to Google. You're like, well, okay, maybe the first phrase you typed in didn't get you what you want, but you're a grown-up. Maybe you could try cis man gender or something like that. So, pay attention to that barrier that's going to come up within you that like, oh, this is a thing I'm not sure I want to know more about. I'm going to act helpless. So then there's sort of like, at this point, you've educated yourself and you're starting to feel a little more confident. At this point, you should be supporting from the background, amplifying women's voices, and not stepping up in front and demanding the attention for, hello, I just used the words that the social justice people said. Aren't you proud of me? Cookie. Sort of the quintessential example I have is people often want to become mentors for coding programs. And my approach is like, yes, who doesn't want to teach young women and see their faces light up and they go home and they're so excited because they've just learned this thing that's empowering their life. It's like, yes, and let as many women as possible do that. and you should organize the venue and order the food, and after the food, clean up after the food. And these are all boring tasks that are often done by women in the background. So, and finally, I'll mention my nonprofit runs something called the Allies Workshop, where we will come to your organization and lead a discussion teaching people these skills.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Allies Workshop, and I want to pursue just what other kinds of things does the ADA initiative do? I mean, just kind of give us a sense of what your work is.
So the first year and a half, I think, that the ADA initiative existed, people would ask me this question, and I would be like, I have no idea, I've forgotten. But I think I've got a better sense of it now. So our flagship program was the Conference Anti-Harassment Policy Movement. 3 years ago, this is the first project Mary and I did together as a test before we went and founded the ADA initiative. And it's in use by, I think I can safely say, thousands of conferences right now. There was a lot of objection to it in the beginning. And then at this point, it's so clearly changing people's behavior in the conversation that I don't think we have to argue about it anymore, which is great. But we still continually, basically every week, have somebody emailing us for advice on how to implement it, because it's frightening. The training is the next set of things we do, the Allies Workshop. We're working on an imposter syndrome training. This is the most popular event at Ada Camp every year. And the thing that it's a little frustrating when people write blog posts about Ada Camp. Ada Camp, it was so wonderful, it changed my life, and all they talk about is imposter syndrome workshop. Like, we did other things, but so one of the things we're thinking of doing is splitting that out into its own training and offering that publicly. And then the third thing is Ada Camp, which I just mentioned, which is a conference for primarily for women in open technology and culture that includes library technology. Please apply. We have a little checkbox you can check that says libraries and something, but libraries is in there. This is a conference that's varied from 30 people to 200 people, and we're trying to keep it around 100 at this point, to bring together people with two things in common. They're feminists already, so you don't have to have that argument, and they know what open technology and culture is, which is a great place to start from. You can have so many conversations you can't have otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you. We are getting some questions, which I want to get to, but I also want to follow up on something. But someone very nicely asked if it's okay if they take photos of you and tweet. Is that
that's
okay?
great. Yes, I'll mention that briefly. Yes, you can take photos. I give consent and share them publicly. One of the things we do at Ada Camp is we have a photography policy where the color of your lanyard indicates whether it's okay for people to take photos of you, or if they need to ask first, or if you should not even ask them. So it makes crowd shots difficult. We have to move everyone to one side, and then. But there's many women that I know personally in these fields that have dedicated stalkers, or else are tired being treated like zoo animals, or the one rotating person on the rotating pictures on the front page. You're like, it looks like this conference is like half people of color and women, and no, they've just been photographed like 80 times. So
yeah, great. I will get to these, I promise, but I wanted to follow up on the imposter syndrome, because I think that's really going to resonate with some people in this audience, but I'm not sure everyone really understands what that means. So if you could talk briefly about that.
Sure. So imposter syndrome is the sense that you're not really qualified for what you're doing. You're a fraud. They're going to find you out at any minute now. So better work really hard and keep all of your doubts secret. This is a thing that's especially prone to happen in fields where a lot of the work happens in private, so academia or technology. And it's really hard to tell how much failure and advice or help people went through in order to create that beautiful, perfectly formatted paper in LaTeX, right? So I think a funny thing about resources for imposter syndrome is that a lot of the people who might write them have imposter syndrome and don't feel qualified to write imposter syndrome training. Fortunately, my co-founder, Mary, has suffered from very little of it in her lifetime. I want to say if you've ever said, I'm not a coder, but I write code, or you're going to say, I only write scripts, it's not really code, or you just don't want to be identified with the tribe of programmers because they have such a bad image. That's probably imposter syndrome there. So,
Great. One of these questions I think really ties into that, which I'm going to use now, which is, what's the best strategy in response to mansplanation?
Okay, so I try not to use this sort of in jargon, and I'm not intending to be offensive to anyone. There's this tendency of people who are used to their voices being listened to, or to having power, to having people be polite to them. If you ever look at a celebrity and people surrounding them, and then they get so weird, this is in due part to this dynamic. One way to call it, one word we have for it when it comes to the power imbalance between men and women is mansplaining. There's another version called Scandisplaining, which is when Scandinavians explain to you that their society has achieved perfect gender equality. It's very annoying. Don't worry, if you spend any time on the internet in feminist circles, one of these will happen to you. Anyway, responding to mansplaining is difficult because what you need to say is actually that automatic respect you're used to getting for your opinion, which in this case is terribly uninformed, you're not going to get it right now. So your audience here, the people who are doing it accidentally and don't realize, I'm not sure that there are really good responses in the sense of guaranteed not to cause any friction, but reminding people of your expertise. This is really great if there's a third party watching mansplaining happen, to interrupt and say, hey, could Sarah or whoever this person is that's the target of the mansplaining talk more about it? I know she has XYZ expertise in this, or I'd like to hear the opinion of blah. So having a third party is really kind of the best situation.
Sumana gave me a question which ties into one that someone else had submitted earlier. So I'll kind of give you both, and you can either answer them together or whatever. But Sumana says, what advice can you give specifically for people fighting sexism, racism, and classism at toxic institutions where they feel like the only one who cares? And the previously submitted question was, what do you recommend for dealing with an organization that claims to be a safe space but has leaders, air quotes, that bully members or create a hostile environment?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's one of the kinds of advice that people ask of the ADA initiative fairly often. I'm in the XYZ group. The person leading it has repeatedly refused to change these things that are obviously bad, and in fact themselves has been an abuser perhaps. What do I do about it? The first thing I would point out is that there's often this dichotomy that people feel they have, that they either have to stay in that organization and put up with the abuse and badness in order to change it, or if they leave, they can no longer fix these problems and they're abandoning everyone in that old organization. This is not always my advice to do, but a thing to consider is that often if you leave an organization and do something in a competing organization or in a parallel space, you can have sometimes more influence over the original organization.
Yeah.
Than you had inside of it. So this happened, I can talk about two examples in my own life. I worked in the Linux kernel. It's led by a famously abusive person who makes obscene gestures in front of, during press conferences and things like that. Linus Torvalds, I'll go ahead and name that name. And that spreads down the hierarchy pretty far of terrible people. There are many wonderful, sweet, encouraging, mentoring people in the Linux kernel development community, and especially in file systems, but they are not up there in the top hierarchy. I left and started the ADA initiative, and it's improved so vastly since then in a way that I could never have done as part of the hierarchy as a Linux kernel programmer. A second one that was even more blatant is there's this concept of hackerspace, which I like to call a community workshop. Sort of a third space full of tools and things where people can get together and work on projects, and maybe in technology, maybe they're writing, all that kind of stuff. there was a hackerspace in San Francisco that was notoriously sexist and physically dangerous to be in. And people had fought for years to get an anti-harassment policy in place and failed. We formed a new feminist hackerspace called Double Union. Our first event that we had an anti-harassment policy. Someone went from that event to the meeting of the other hackerspace, presented our anti-harassment policy, and got it passed that night. Wow. Like, it's not often that you see that direct of a connection between going and doing your competing thing. So it's not always, the answer is not always leaving, but knowing that you can leave without abandoning will often give you greater power and confidence.
That's great. I want to return to that idea of supporting from the background, because I think that it comes difficult to me who, loves putting himself out there and getting the limelight. So, yeah, duh. So, what strategies can you give me and others who might not be familiar with what it means to support from the background?
Sure. So there's a great example in technology and VC, venture capital and startups in Silicon Valley. There's a well-known, famous, powerful person at Stanford University called Vivek Wadhwa, naming names, power. Vivek Wadhwa sort of built himself a career of speaking about women in startups and venture capital and tech. And part of this career was being the keynote speaker at women's entrepreneur conferences or writing editorials for major national newspapers like the Wall Street Journal. And finally, people began, I'll name a positive name, Shanley Kane was the first person to really call him out on this, saying like, look, what you should be doing is when people call you up to interview you for the Newsweek article, saying, actually, you should speak to a woman's name who is an expert in this area. So he'd built himself this career. That was a terrible idea. So that it's kind of building in this automatic, hey, people are going to come to you because you have status and power. That's why you're an ally. They're going to come to you with that kind of respect and assumption that your voice is the one that they want to hear. And building this reflexive, no, not me, this person, is a good skill to develop. Another good example is Anil Dash has also been active in increasing diversity in technology in general. He recently wrote a blog post about the year he retweeted only women. And nobody noticed. But yeah, that's a thing I do intentionally now, is instead of looking for the male person who tweeted about XYZ thing that probably a woman wrote, I go and find the original author, or I find a woman who's active in the area and I retweet her. So that kind of level of like thinking whose voices you're amplifying, including when you're using your own voice.
Great. I don't think we've had a question from Twitter. Oh, well, here we go. Okay, cool. I want a chance to look at this, though, but I want to talk about, since this seems to tie in at this point, a sentiment I often hear in discussions about gender and library technology is, let's make sure we're not discriminating against men, or we need to listen to men too. How have you addressed this concern before?
Yeah, so I feel this comes in, we're trying to be logical, we're trying to be fair, we're trying to be egalitarian. And you say, hi, 50% women, 50% men, approximately. There's definitely other things going on there. But that's like, you feel like that should be about the ratio that you're hearing from people. An interesting thing is that our basic sense of how much people are talking is completely influenced by status and power and our experience growing up and what we see in media and what we see around us. So there's a great study of an Australian teacher trying to spend the proportionate amount of time talking to and interacting with the girls in his class as the boys in his class. This is a primary education situation. And he found two terrible things. One was that it was really hard to do. It's extremely difficult to call for him to call on women, or girls, sorry, so used to saying women, girls 50% of the time. But the second part was that when girls participated 50% of the time, the boys perceived it as being 90% of the time.
Wow.
And complained bitterly. Why are you paying so much attention to the girls when previously the reality had been the girls, the 50% were getting 10% of the time. So there's a number of studies about this, like when you look at a crowd scene, when do you perceive it as being 50% women? Crowd scenes on TV and movies average 17% women. So this is you can see that connection. So what I see most often is when people are saying, hey, what about men's voices? That's a man's voice being listened to at that very moment. I just haven't seen it be a problem so far. I have another hilarious real-world story. I was at the Grace Hopper Celebration for Women in Computing, which is many thousands of women who are interested in computer science. It's a wonderful, very positive experience. But I was in a session with about 80 women and one man who stood up and made a very basic statement like, I believe women should have equal opportunity to computer science jobs. Great. He got spontaneous applause from the entire room. And I thought, gosh, that seems a little excessive for stating the principle of the conference, right? So, but it gets better. So I used this example at the next ADA camp because we were still having a mixed gender main ADA camp session at that time as an attempt to make people aware of our socialization to privileged men's voices and to try to counteract that for the conference. And so I told this story, and then everyone laughed, hooray. 10 minutes later, we're halfway through our introductions where people stand up and say a sentence about why they're here. And the tallest man in the room stands up and says, I'm here because I think women should have equal opportunity. And people start applauding. And they're looking at each other, like some of them like, didn't we just talk about this? I don't know what's happening. So after that, it was hilarious to watch. So that's a good thing to keep in mind is how strong our socialization is to listen to men's voices.
A great tie-in for me to that point is the power of language itself. And I was struck this week, actually yesterday I think, one of my friends posted on Facebook that in her daughter's class, they had a word, they were doing word definitions, and one of the words was tomboy. And her daughter was, people in the class thought that her daughter was a tomboy. And I'm also struck by the word bossy, which tends to be used, I think, in some very negative ways around girls and women. So can you say something about the power of language and, how we can work against some of these things that are used as clubs and oftentimes?
Right.
So.
So there's a number of words that don't appear necessarily gender linked, but when you look at how we use them in language, they're used almost exclusively to describe women negatively. Occasionally, when they're used with men, they're intended to be positive. So there's some variation in there. So kind of as a general, you don't need to go through and memorize a list of those, although that helps. Don't use shrill, don't use bitchy, that sort of thing. But if you start paying attention and thinking about how is this adjective used? Do I ever hear it used to describe men in a negative way, or is it used solely in this other way? So it's sort of a general principle you can use to start becoming more aware of the kind of language you're using. Is this a good point to talk about the tone argument, do you think?
Sure, yeah, whatever.
So often the place where you will see this sort of ostensibly not gendered language, like bossy or shrill or hysterical, it's in the context of a tone argument. And probably many of you are familiar with this, but the concept of a tone argument is that you're resisting somebody's arguments by saying, you didn't say them right. You didn't say them nicely enough. I don't like the tone of what you're saying. The difficulty with this is that when you're arguing for social change, when you're trying to reduce that status hierarchy to make power more equal, people don't like what you're saying. And it doesn't actually matter how you say it. They're still not going to like it because the content of it is bad. But that's that feeling of discomfort and guilt, and the way to respond to that is to say, oh, if you'd only done that better, you would have convinced me. But since you were so rude or bossy or shrill, I'm not going to listen to you. And one of the things to keep in mind about this is that often the people who are willing to speak up about these very unpopular things that will harm their career, they're often people who speak up in general and make a lot of people angry, and perhaps are unaware or unable to control saying the truth even when they know it will upset people. So this will often get the situation where the people who are working to increase social justice in your area that you should listen to the most, you can dismiss them by saying, oh, they're so attention seeking, or they're so bossy or rude. So it's a thing to keep in mind.
Great. To kind of return to the language issue just a little bit more specifically to this audience, I got this question that language is important. Recently I heard the term software creators suggested as a more inclusive term for like all of the jobs that are required to construct software, as opposed to coder or developer. Do you have thoughts about that, or do you have other suggestions for how to use words that are perhaps less likely to make someone, have the imposter syndrome happen?
Right. Yeah, I think terminology like this is very important, and it will continually evolve. And so this is the first time I've heard the phrase software creator. I personally like it. It's hard to argue that you have created a piece of software, whereas programmer is more about you as an identity of this thing that you're doing. But language will continually evolve, and perhaps software creator will be the cool new thing that VCs use to mean people who look like Mark Zuckerberg. Who knows? It can be super annoying at times, but I've learned to value these sorts of things. Like, we work really hard to have gender-neutral bathrooms at many of our events, and somebody said, actually, maybe all gender bathrooms is a better term. And I thought, yes, of course, all gender, that makes more sense. It's inclusive, rather than being like, let's flatten gender and make it neutral and beige, So.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point that I want to touch on, which is this gender, of course, is not a binary. So, what kinds of things do we need to do to actually make, society more comfortable for people of all gender identities?
Right. Yeah, so I'm not a super expert on this area, but I have learned a lot through doing the ADA initiative. I try hard to pay attention to my language and don't always succeed, especially in this job where I am focusing on women and often going and talking to the people who have power in society, who are generally cis men, men who were born, when they were born, were assigned the male gender and identify as male now. So one of the things I've done is change my language to say all genders instead of both genders, to not use men and women as to indicate all people, that sort of thing. This is another place where it's really great to go find some people on Twitter that you don't follow already, who talk about issues related to the gender binary and its assumptions in society. And there's going to be lots of corrections, and it's going to seem rude, and and you should go with that and be thankful. So.
Great. This came in via Twitter. How do we reframe caretaker status and issues to include all and not focusing on women, primarily when these questions come up?
Do you have a sense of what caretaker status
means?
No, please. Okay.
Please. Oh, I'm sure everyone wants to know what the.
Yeah. So the way I interpret this, and hopefully this will be useful, is that it's often considered women's responsibilities to shape and care for a culture, a group of people that it's women's jobs to set up the lunch meetup, to make sure that somebody's birthday party occurs, the card that gets passed around. It's usually a woman ends up doing that. This is this is just like systems librarians and children's librarians. It needs to come from both directions. that emotional labor needs to be valued more highly, and one way to do this is to make it a formal function that's recognized in your yearly review. You're the person who organizes the lunch outing. And at the same time, spread that work out more often. So you're going to come to this, a lot of people say, oh, I'm socially awkward, I'm anxious, I don't want to be rejected, I don't know where people want to eat. It's not easy for anyone. That's kind of the point, is that it's work, and it's difficult work. It can be unpleasant work. And when you see that kind of thing going on in your group, look for that unpleasant work as an ally, and go take over some of it. And if you're if you're part of the group that usually gets this dumped on you in an uncaring and unappreciative way, try refusing to do it. Might not be comfortable. You might have to go to some really bad lunches, but so I hope that's useful. Oh, and I just want to relate that in general to the concept that the burden of social change is on the oppressed group, right? No, that's a really great way to oppress that group even farther. So one of the principles of the ADA initiative is that we pay everyone who does the work more than a couple of hours of work a week for us. We just simply refuse volunteer work because this needs to be valued with money.
Great. Oh, thank you. You mentioned hacker spaces that are safe for women. I think that's certainly one strategy to help women come into coding in a comfortable situation. Are there other things that are helpful to bring women into coding who might otherwise, be, the imposter syndrome might kick in and they'll think, oh, I can't do this or whatever. Are there strategies that can actually assist beyond a safe space and
Yes.
that kind of thing?
So one of the things, people tend to get into arguments about the best way to get more women in coding. And really you need to do all of the things. So there's the most popular form that's most often supported is the coding workshop. Having these be all women is very useful. It makes such a difference in people's confidence and who gets turned to for help. Creating safer spaces online, so mailing lists or IRC channels. A lot of people think that these, thank you. A lot of people think that these are cause greater division and make things worse. Actually, creating a safer space causes people within a community to identify more with the greater community because they can be both the thing that's really essential to themselves, their gender identity, and part of this larger community. And then it goes all the way to stuff like this less popular things like conference anti-harassment policies or documenting the things that happen that are negative in these spaces. So,
kind of a twist on that, or a question I just got is, as a single mother, I find it hard to code on my own time. This puts me at a disadvantage in the open source world. And do you have any other ideas, I suppose, besides more hours in the day, which of course can't happen?
Right. That's open source, the most egalitarian society in the world. No.
Not.
And the funny thing is that I have never written open source code except for money or as a student. And I've never bought this do it in your spare time stuff. And it turns out that doing it in your spare time is terribly discriminatory because the people who, an aspect of oppression is you do have more work to do in less spare time. So there's actually some great programs. There's a growing number of internships, paid internships. I know internships, usually you don't hear that word and paid together. Paid internships in open source software. In particular, there's the outreach program for women, which is growing by leaps and bounds each year. So that's a great way, and it's not just for students. You can be a grown adult with a child that you're taking care of, and you can do an outreach program for women internship. So changing the idea of how people get into open source from doing stuff for free to there are paid formal opportunities to learn. That's one of the goals. Oh, Mozilla has just announced a new project called Project Ascend, which is for disadvantaged people in a number of different axes to be paid to come and learn how to write Mozilla code.
Cool. unfortunately, our time is almost up. So what do you want us to leave this room remembering from our time here today? You know, any one or two things or three things that you want to really emphasize?
Sure. Just briefly, I want to repeat the tone argument. This is crucial if you want change in your community. Pay attention to your reactions and try to figure out when you're engaging in a tone argument or you're rejecting something for reasons other than that it's true. The other thing I'd like to bring is a message of hope. We wrote an article chronicling this sort of progress towards being more welcoming to women in several other communities. Open source software, science fiction and fantasy, and the atheist and skeptic movement. And what you see is there's a pattern, and the beginning of this pattern is very discouraging. It involves a lot of attacking people who dare to speak up, a lot of internal resistance to what seems like very basic changes like anti-harassment policies. And there'll be threats, all that kind of stuff. That's just part of what happens, and you should view it as progress. And when you read this article, you can see like, oh yes, we're at stage 4 because somebody threw a tomato at me on stage. Yes.
Don't give them any ideas.
Look at these chairs. No tomatoes. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Valerie, for sharing your thoughts and information with us. You give us so much to think about and act upon. So please join me in thanking Valerie Aurora. Great job.
I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so we do have a break until 10:15, at which point we will do another book raffle to get you back here on time, and then lightning talks. Can I have all the people who are doing lightning talks to make sure to load their presentations, as well as our 3 presenters this morning? If you need to check that your laptop is working, that sort of thing. Everyone else can go have a break.
I didn't bring my randomizer up. I just randomized a bunch of names and took a picture with my phone. I'm going to read down them until 2 of them are given away. So, our first winner of this round is Birkin Diana. And Julia Bowder, are you in the room? Yay! That was easy. Can someone sitting next to the book box hold up your hand? Okay. Again, either fill your name in on the sheet for one of those books or take one of the physical ones in the box. If there are already 5 names filled out on the sheet, please don't add any more. That's all that publisher is giving us.
So am I good to start, or?
Yeah.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Steven Anderson, and I'm from the Boston Public Library. The Boston Public Library is a DPLA service hub, which means that we work with a lot of other smaller institutions throughout our state and harvest data from them. And when we do that, we harvest a lot of geographic data with their records in various different formats. And when we were doing this process, we realized that we wanted to make that geographic data a little bit better, a little bit more structured, and a little bit more useful to our system itself. So we created this gem called BPLGeo, which is a geocoding gem, and what I'll be presenting on right now. So why do it? Geographic data is just neat, but unfortunately most of it is unstructured and lacks standardization. So we needed to, create a way to get hierarchical structured data from what we were getting in from these different sources. And what is structured data good for, or what is structured geographic data good for? Well, it's great for faceting. This way all your names are the same when you're faceting by places. And it's also great if you want to put in a plugin like Blacklight Maps or any map in itself to go ahead and visualize that data and where it's located. So this is, you could all go ahead and just use the gem in your local Ruby project, but this is just a quick way of getting started that I've done in screenshots here. And as you can see, the first thing I've done is just clone the bplgeo.git. I've taken the sample YML file and copied that over, and then I went ahead and edited it to go put in my settings. And this is a little bit of what that setup looks like for that YML file. And it has a bunch of different options here. You don't have to fill in any of them because there are defaults set for it, or it'll pass over using that source as a possible thing to parse your string against. So you can see, you can use TGN or get thesaurus of geographic names. You can use geonames. You can use MapQuest, Bing, and Google right now just uses the free guest API. And one thing also as well is that as this this cat with poor spelling skills is saying here, MapQuest isn't very good, so I don't recommend you actually fill out that key. I had built support for it, but then discovered that it will easily get you lost, like this cat who will hopefully one day find his way home. So, as you can see here, there are some unit tests. You can run Rake and get some tests so far with it. It's very limited right now, and hopefully we can expand upon it. And then here is it in action a little bit. So this first one is I have a geographic string that I know is in a pretty good geographic format. It's not a subject string. So I just pass it into bplgeo.parse, and it gives me back a response that has stuff back from one of those APIs, either MapQuest, Bing, or Google. And you also notice near the bottom that you get a TGN entry with the ID for that, and if it differs much from the original string, this doesn't mean that it isn't correct. It just means that, for instance, this one has a street address, and TGN and geonames don't have a way to accurately represent that part. You can also see that you get back coordinates outside of that, and those are coordinates from those mapping locations. So you got the actual coordinates for 421 South Salisbury Street, in addition to those IDs for TGN and geonames. And this is another example here with bplgeo.parse where you have a geographic LCSH string, and this time you pass true for it to parse it. And you can see here it parses that Cranberry Industry, Massachusetts, Warmarth, and gets that it was in Warmarth, Massachusetts. Yes. So beyond that, once you have those IDs, this is split out in case you just want to use one portion of the gem and not the entire thing. So you can go ahead and call tgn.getTGN data with that ID and get back a response of what that hierarchical layout was, along with the coordinates that TGN had. You can also do the same thing with geonames and get back those coordinates along with the hierarchical information that geonames had. Here's what it looks like in mods in our system. So you can see we have two entries, one for the TGN and then another subject geographic near the bottom that was just Fennell Hall, because Fennell Hall wasn't, of course, represented in TGN itself, with the coordinates for Fennell Hall compared to just the generic coordinates for TGN. Caveats, it's just been hacked together so far for our own needs, so until we get somebody else who's interested in using it and lets us know what their needs are, it's hard to adapt it to that. It can still use more unit tests, and I kind of just added geonames yesterday because a lot of other people seem to be using that over TGN. And these are contacts and other links. And I'll leave this up for like 10 seconds if anybody wants to copy any of them down. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
That's what it's going to be. Okay.
F11? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie Fullington. This is Charlie Morris, and we want to talk to you for a few minutes.
Sorry, okay, better? Yeah, better? Okay, all right. So I'm Angie, this is Charlie. We want to talk to you about how we're moving to a responsive website without a major organization-wide redesign initiative. So we're lucky to be starting with a good site. It pretty much works. Nobody's demanding a redesign, so that's a good place to start from. And so why do we want to update? For same reasons most people think they want to update. But responsive functionality being a really driving force. We haven't revisited our site design since we launched it, in 2010. So we want to get to a flatter, more modern, more open design that's more responsive friendly. And along the way, we want to give our application developers some UI elements and leadership about brand and style guidelines, some tools that they can use for the applications we need to integrate with the site. So how are we getting there? So they say if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, he's going to jump out. But if you put the frog in a pot of lukewarm water and you turn the heat up slowly, the frog doesn't see what's coming. Because his instincts are geared toward sudden changes. So we are making a series of incremental changes to the site over the last few months. We've done that. So we're building a responsive theme, but nobody's really seen that except the developers in this room. No developers were boiled in this. Okay, so so what we've done is a series of iterative changes that represent subtle changes that are moving us toward the responsive design that's also being developed in the background, so that when we turn on responsive, the frog doesn't jump. Right. All right, Charlie's gonna tell you a little more.
Yeah, and you can read these here, subtle things, increasing font size and removing borders, getting to a flatter look. Okay, so I wanted to kind of frame this in a useful concept that Jared Spool coined called the magic escalator of acquired knowledge, which is just kind of fun to say. But it goes something like this. A user comes to your site brand new and doesn't know how to use it. They have to figure it out. And as they use it more, they learn more, and they climb that wonderful escalator. When you redesign, you make the risk of having the user fall back on this magic escalator and having to figure out things all over again. And we really wanted to avoid that. So subtle changes, maybe they go beneath the notice, what a user will notice, and they'll stay at that high target knowledge level, which is really important for our students who we really care about, who we want to be able to use the site painlessly and easily throughout the update, not redesign. Okay, and the subtitle on the title slide was Sneak Peek. Here it is. It looks pretty similar, right? Well, if you look at NCSU Library's website. Anyway, here's the sneak peeks for the mobile views, iPhone and Nexus 4. And it is not live yet. We plan to launch it. It's pretty much ready to go. We just have to do some QA on it. We plan to launch it at the end of this semester. One other thing I wanted to mention is that this site, the theme that we're developing for this site, which is in Drupal, is on GitHub, and please go check it out. And I wanted to also mention that we've really found GitHub to be a great resource for project management. We've tried different tools over the years, Trello and lots of other different stuff, but GitHub is really sticking, and I think it's because it's tied to the code base, but it's also just really easy to use. And we've been really loving it, especially for the milestones part. Okay, here's the credits and other colleagues to thank. And we would love to hear any feedback that any of you might have. You can catch us on Twitter or just email. And I don't have much time here, but here's an obligatory. Here's the stack we're using. We chose Foundation 5. We are using SAS and loving it. We're using Drupal 7. We're rolling our own theme. Font Awesome is our icon set, and that is time. Thank you. 11. Next.
Good morning. I'm Justin Patterson, and I'm a programmer from Penn State University. I wanted to share with you what a colleague and I, Jeff Manelli, and I have been working on this past year in the DevOps arena. DevOps is the bridge between sysadmins and developers, and the goal is to make everyone's life a little bit easier, including my own. I wanted to share with you what we have done and how it benefited us. Last year, we incorporated Capistrano with our Rails-based apps. Capistrano is a remote multi-server automation tool. If you're not using Cap or something like it, I definitely recommend it for you for your deployments. At Penn State, it allows us to deploy and perform routine actions across multiple servers by issuing just one command. The alternative is cumbersome, it allows for errors, and it's time-consuming to do it across multiple nodes. So when I say automated, I mean just that. Before we incorporated Cap, you had to wake up early, stumble through a bunch of commands listed here, and then the most important part was number 10. You had to keep repeating it for every server that you had to do that day. For us, that was a minimum of 2, and then you have to hope that it all worked. Now, it's all just done in one command, cap production deploy. If it fails, well, back in the day, then you had to do at least 18 commands to undo that. Now, one command, cap staging deploy rollback. Pretty sweet, and it's very fast. But wait, there's more. Cap has plenty of recipes available, and it's easy to make your own. Check out our GitHub repo if you're interested. We have recipes for Passenger, RBM, Apache restarts, cron, etc. I've included what used to happen if we did a Passenger upgrade as well for the gem. It was 6 steps on each of the machines, and now it's just one command to do both of the machines that we need to do. Something else that we've also looked into is improving setting up and maintaining our servers. We want consistency across all of our servers and ensuring that all the packages are the same, the directories are the same, permissions are the same, etc., and ownership. Once we set it up through the tool that we're using, Chef, it constantly monitors them, checks them, and puts things back how they should be according to definitions that we've set up. We got onto this concept after I saw a colleague of mine. He took a server out of a load balance setup, took it offline, deleted it, created a new server, and then had it back up within an hour. He only used a handful of commands, and it's one thing to document how you would do this, it's another to implement it, and in this case, we really didn't have to do a lot of work with it, and we knew that everything was going to be the same as it had been. The next thing I want to look at is to help ensure we do not utilize Ruby gems with known security issues, we subscribe to a site called Gemnasium. If you're not familiar with it, this site harvests your gem file from GitHub and compares your gems to known vulnerabilities, and if newer versions exist as well, it'll let you know. Our one project ScholarSphere contains 21 dependencies. So instead of checking out the site every day, I devised an innocuous check that runs daily and checks Gemnasium. It does a screen scrape to check if there's any vulnerabilities present, and if so, it'll email the developers that are working on the project and let them know that they need to update the gems. The last project we're working on relates to how we push things to public repositories, such as GitHub or Bitbucket. One of the problems that you run into is that you have to ignore config files, secrets, and passwords. Where this could have came in handy is this week there was a news story that surfaced. Turns out there was over 10,000 Amazon Web Service keys in clear text on GitHub alone. Yeah. If you don't know what that is, it's equivalent to the admin username and password to create, manage, and delete your Amazon servers. So the project I'm working on uses GPG encryption with public key rings. It will allow you to put your GPG key in, encrypt and decrypt your files, and it'll allow you to save your repos out in the public and have everything intact, yet keep it secure. Thank you for your time. If you're interested, you can check out our GitHub repo PSU-stewardship, and there's some of the projects that we have. Thank you.
well, that didn't work. Let's see, full screen. Hi, so I'm Jenny, and I'm going to talk about how to be part of an open source community. Maybe you'll even get to work with me. I work for Mozilla. Really, I meant maybe you'll get to hang out with me, but work is okay too. All right, so everyone loves open source, and there haven't been enough dog memes in this entire conference. Wow, such code, so open, much beauty, very remixed. A quick review. We're all using open source tools, and I don't want to make assumptions about what people know, but I think most people at this conference know that we are all using open source tools. And there are lots of benefits to contributing to open source communities, and I don't mean necessarily, you can just write code in your house or wherever at your work, and a lot of people here are working on GitHub, they're being a part of it, but I mean like really joining a community and being part of a community and even interacting with people maybe, if you want, like conferences. Awesome, you can learn new stuff, you can get mentorship opportunities, you can get amazing street cred, you can improve code, you can have fun, and you can interact with exciting other people, like the people here, or me. Here's an example of Ma's camp from last year, for example, of people hanging out, doing things. I work here, I don't actually work there, I work from my house, but sometimes I get to be there. And here is my team. We're exciting and fun people. And so I encourage you all to contribute to Mozilla because that's my job. But you can contribute to lots of open source projects in lots of different ways, and you don't have to necessarily be a coder. I know a lot of people here are programmers or coders or systems administrators, but a lot of us aren't. I don't write very great code, so there are other ways that you can contribute, and I'm not going to talk about all of them because this is a lightning talk. But if you're part of an open source community, could you raise your hand? Yay, awesome, you all are awesome, and that's great, and like say hi on IRC or interact with one another, talk about what's great about being part of an open source community, because working together is success, which is, I only put this in because that's a great book, and if you haven't read it, you totally should. You can get it for free online. It's called The Art of Community by Jono Bacon, and so like I got involved. So Valerie just called out this internship, but this is how I got involved. I did the Outreach for Women program through the GNOME Foundation, and it was amazing. It changed my life. It was incredible. And it's why I'm at Mozilla, and it's how I got involved in open source communities. So for example, you could go to this website. This is an example of one of the ways that you can find various ways to be a part of open source communities. So like, do you know how to translate? No. I don't know how to write code. I can teach. So maybe I could teach Hackosaurus. You can do something like this. You could make something like this for your own project. It is all freely available. These are really fun ways to get people involved. Where did my slides go? I have no idea what just happened there. Okay, let's see. So, oh, here we go. All right, so yeah, one of us, we accept you. So there are other things that you can do, like documenting or archiving or coding or teaching, evangelizing, spreading the word about open source, localizing, which is always super needed in projects like Wikipedia and Mozilla and all of these huge open source projects, or mentoring. You could be a mentor to somebody, maybe someone like me who's just starting out in open source and is really excited about it but doesn't quite know where to go. And you can design, and UX has come up a lot. It's super important, and we have these skills and we can offer them. So you want to share your open source expertise with your users. Let's say you're a librarian and you have users who you interact with or patrons who you interact with. You're totally in it for the win, like this poodle on a computer. So here, cats and computers, done. I'm over cats and computers. So here are some things that you can do. You can teach the web. WebMaker is an amazing tool. It kind of helps users interact with both HTML coding, CSS coding, while having sort of a graphical interface to do it. You can demonstrate the value of open source to your community. You can bring open source to your campus. There are programs and places and people that you can interact with to do this. You can mentor new community members, both IRL and URL. You can default open your tools. Join a user group or club. There are tons of them. Like just in this area, there are tons of them. Take or teach classes, learn about open badging and use it. And in short, ask what you can do for your community and get in touch with me if you want to. I'm Jenny Rose Halperin. I tweet at Little Wow, and there's my website. Thanks.
If you see sure, will you aim me at it?
Up in the corner, not near the other.
Top right. Thank you. All right, and is F5? And you can hear me? Hi, I'm Tim Shearer from UNC Chapel Hill. This is the cover of a diary, which is really a notebook, and I just want to point out the moonshine. So in Asheville in 2010, I gave a little talk about this, and I wanted to kind of let you all know where we are now. And this is the number of people in the room who don't remember or weren't there. So this is a story of keeping it simple, stupid. We have large archival collections at UNC Chapel Hill, and one of the things we got quite a few years ago was a grant from Mellon to explore how we could do mass digitization. The top goal was to create a decision matrix, so this is to figure out which to digitize first, and the second was how to construct a sustainable, large-scale program. These were the constraints. What they decided was that we needed to do discovery via the HTML version of the finding aids. I don't know how everyone feels about that, but that was a constraint. Minimal metadata for the objects, so when you scan something, often the thing that had distinguished it from the next thing was that it was scan 1 or scan 2 or scan 3. Content DM was what we had. We had to support variable rates of ingest because we would have maybe one semester 5 grad students, the next semester 2. And also we have workflow that goes through the Digital Production Center, right? So you have to get time on the scanners. It had to be flexible because the amount of volume that you'd find in a given collection would vary. And we needed to make it so that students could work independently with minimal training, and we should work transparently with little or no management or maintenance. All right, so what we had was very consistent metadata. The tech services folks and special collections at Wilson Library are rock stars. They have incredibly tight workflow and policies which keep things nice and hygienic. Content DM is actually easy to use to put stuff into, and they had unique identifiers for not just collections, but for what are called containers, like folder 1, folder 2. Everything was consistent. So here was the sort of simple solution, which is you have the mother XML and you derive both sides from the mother XML. So we XSLT out HTML finding aids, put them on the web, and we would also XSLT out essentially ingest packages, tab delimited ingest packages, which would go into Content DM. And so you can see here that there's, in the Content DM interface, there's an identifier for the collection number and an identifier for the hook ID. And this is the HTML derived from the same. You see the same hook ID in the same collection. What happens is no human beings have to get involved in putting things in 2 different places, but you can reliably expect things to be the same in both places. So we had sort of loose systems, tight data. And all we did was build a web API on top of Content DM. So what happens is you download the finding aid, it executes JavaScript, makes a call to the web service. If it gets results back, it can go in and just light up the portions of the finding aid that actually have digitized content. This means that anytime you go to the finding aid, it's accurate. You can add 3 new folders today, they'll be lit up. So this is what it looked like before the JavaScript executes. This is what it looked like after the JavaScript executes. And this is where we were until recently. So it has been extremely robust. We are over 500,000 items digitized or scanned so far across multiple collections. Remember, the progenitor of this was the Digital Southern Historical Collection. So we've added 566 collections, 74 since the last time I looked, and we're at 372,185 scans. It's also been extensible. So we have other Uber collections in the Wilson, the North Carolina collection of photographic archives, which are different than a lot of manuscript materials, university archives, the Southern Folklife is just beginning, and we had a grant. It supports all kinds of objects because it lets Content DM handle the management of the player. So if it's a PDF, Content DM handles it. If it's an image, Content DM handles it. It's an AV file, Content DM handles it. It's sustainable. The workflow's been well defined. It integrates well with their existing workflows. It's fairly simple to train people to do it. Technology, for the most part, just works. We haven't seen anything wrong with scaling up, and we don't have to do anything, as I said, to add new content types. All right, so what's changed? It was slow. I'm sorry, Christian, but it was very, very, very slow. Content DM is not a database. Doing subselects within a collection takes forever. So when people were waiting for the JavaScript to execute, sometimes they just gave up and had no idea there was digitized material. So what we did, what Steve did, Steve is over there in the corner, was to build a caching shim. So nightly, we rebuild essentially a very lightweight database, and now the web API talks to the database rather than talking to Content DM, and now it moves like that. UX, am I done? Damn. All right. It's awesome.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. My name is Sean Airy. I'm at Duke University Libraries. We're here in North Carolina. I want to talk about a couple of things, but before I do, I want to make a quick plug. We're now hiring for an IT director for the libraries. It's an AUL for information technology. Check it out on the website if you're interested. A couple of things I want to talk about. These are two products that two services, two things that a lot of us use in the libraries. Google Custom Search. I know a lot of us use Google Custom Search to power the library website search. What a lot of us don't take advantage of is Google provides APIs to this service that you can kind of go nuts with. And then schema.org, Dan Scott gave an awesome overview on Tuesday about what that is, so sparing me from having to explain it in my lightning talk. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. And I really want to talk about how you can use these two things together in creative ways that can provide some useful services for search and discovery. What we wanted to do, we had a three-step plan here. First was getting schema.org data into our digital collections and finding aids. Those are things that have a largely external audience, so it's important that they're optimized for search discovery. We embedded that data into all 74,000 digital objects pages, as well as 2,100 finding aids. Second, get Google to actually know about that data and index it. And then third is kind of our going off the rails crazy idea. Well, if Google is actually going to ingest that data, our structured data that we're putting out there, and Google provides APIs for us to like get it back and use that structured data from their index, why not just like use Google, dude? Why don't we use Google to power our search for these services? We're not going to beat them yet, at relevance and other things that they do. So we want to try this idea out. Finding aids, this was our old search. People were very frustrated. They would search for a person's name, but the person's papers may be on like page 2 or 3 of the search results. And as we know, they may as well not even exist if that's the case. We had to do better, right? So I wanted to show just really quickly, how did we get schema.org data in there? Really easy, RDFA-like attributes. Using the schema.org vocabulary, just applying a collection, making it a collection page with a name and a description and a creator. Really kind of easy to get that data in there. On the other end, when you do a search now in our finding aids, you're getting a search result that is powered by Google Custom Search, but it doesn't look like Google Custom Search. We've really built our own rich snippets to make it a compelling presentation. If there's a digitized content within the finding aid, like Tim just showed at UNC, we're showing a little thumbnail. We're pulling out some of those schema.org properties that we've expressed in the finding aids themselves using Google's JavaScript API, and it's pretty sweet and pretty easy to set up. Digital collections are a little more complex. there's hierarchy, there's a lot more kinds of properties. I won't go into all the details there, but we do have a digital collection that we needed to really improve the relevance, rank, and the handling of non-Roman characters in, and we decided to try this approach out in that one collection that you can try. In this case, we're using Google's XML API to populate the search results, and we make it look exactly like we're used to seeing search results in our existing application, and it works pretty well. So with this approach, there's some good stuff. Do-it-yourself snippets, it's really great. You can do that with the free Google Custom Search service. Just use the API, and they have this nice templating format that it's basically just some divs with some data attributes to really power put in your data and handle the display logic. Really easy. You can view source on our search results page if you want to see how we did it. Rich snippets in Big Google. With schema.org, libraries don't have a lot of the things that Google actually renders. Okay, big Google rich snippets we have some videos that do render kind of nicely. It's cool. Google's really fast. Relevance can't beat it. It's doing a great job for us with that collection with non-Roman characters. There's some gotchas. The biggest thing that was surprising to us was results per query limits when you're using the Google API. So it's not going to be the right solution for everything discovery-wise. The result count is really highly approximated and a bit unstable, so that may not be the right solution for a lot of things. And then we've discovered a bunch of quirks and omissions using different syntax to get that schema.org info in there in what Google reports back when we use their API. That's all I've got. Thanks.
You think you have everything all ready, and then of course it takes forever to get up. Okay. Right on. So hi everyone, I'm Kate Flynn and this is Tracy Seneca, and we're gonna talk to you today a little bit about the Chicago Collections Consortium. So first, who are we? We are 12 Chicago area institutions, universities big and small and everything in between, and also other institutions including museums. And we are looking to build a portal. So what is this portal? The vision for the portal really is to have integrated access to Chicago-focused content across CCC member libraries. So the problem currently is there's a lot of similar stuff at different places. So we have an example up here of this, where we've got two posters from the Century of Progress World Fair, and they're at two different places. And unless you knew that both institutions had this content, you might not be able to find it. So the portal will include not only digital images, but also fully searchable finding aids. And we're really looking to support the needs of not only experienced researchers, but also the general public. So once we started investigating doing this portal, we came up against two problems. And the first is everybody has really different metadata standards. And you can see some listed there. And even within these metadata standards, there is a lot of difference, and I'm sure everybody knows this about EAD. This is a screenshot from an analysis of our EAD done by one of our member archivists. And to make a long story short, no two EAD implementations are the same. And our second problem is not only are our metadata standards different, but our descriptive standards are different. So we have everything from a record with 51, no joke, LCSH subject headings to records that have very loose subject headings, shoe, street. And we've got more than 7,000 high-level subject terms, and of these, very few are shared among organizations. So we evaluated a lot of different technologies, and the one that we ultimately chose was XDF from California Digital Library, and there are a couple reasons for this. The first reason relates to the first problem that we had, that we have a lot of different metadata standards, and XDF really provides flexible metadata processing, so we can process everybody's content without changing it. So this is a screenshot of our text XDF instance where we have loaded in content from 6 different institutions. We're running 27 different processing scripts, and everything works, nothing broke. And our second reason for choosing XTF is the dc.xml file that you have with XTF. And this allows for, again, not editing the original metadata file to kind of tame the subject madness that exists there. And instead, we can have in this dc.xml file a CCC-specific lexicon that provides a simpler and more consistent interface for the end user. So what you end up having is this. You have your original EAD file with the massive amount of LCSH subject headings, and if the user wants to search for shoehorn of all things, they're going to be able to find it. But at the same time, they're going to have a little bit simpler, consistent interface in the companion Dublin core file to look at.
So what's missing from this? Those of you who have worked with XTF know it does not come out of the box with a deposit or an administrative interface. So the CCC member institutions have spent about the last year designing exactly that, an interface where archivists can sign in, deposit content, control how that's going to show up in the public portal, for which we just got funded. I wish I could jump up and down and tell you all the details, but the ink is not yet dry, so look for an announcement and we'll communicate with this community, hopefully next week as we get to announce the details. But there is a position open if you're interested in this project. It's been on the Code4Lib list. It's closing soon, so please take a look. And I'm just going to share with you a couple of the many designs that we have prepared that answer exactly these questions. And I think the key here is the deposit workflow starts with you're establishing the rules. So, so when you sign in and you say, I'm going to give you some EAD, we're going to come back at you and say, what exactly do you mean by EAD? And so this is an example, for instance, for a content DM metadata export for images. You'll be asked a couple questions, but eventually you'll hit this form and you'll say, I'm going to map my metadata to what you're asking for. So if I have latitude, longitude, street address, I can convey that here. And we will map what we extract as best we can to our lexicon. So this is using real data from the Art Institute, and this gives you a sense of how frequently we were able to map to our own lexicon. But of course, you can tag things. This is the Sun Ra collection. It gives you a sense of how we want to simplify that subject access for the end user. Thank you very much. We'll be making it available online.
We up and running? Is that there? Hi, my name is Ian Walls. I'm the Web Services and Emerging Technologies Librarian at UMass Amherst, and I'm going to talk to you today about some contrary technologies that I'm using that you're probably not and probably won't. So first off, this is not a sales pitch. I am not trying to convince you that these technologies are in any way better than what you're already using. This is what I'm using, and we're all interested in cool stuff, so consider this awareness. If you want to tune out, feel free to do that at this point. So the first one, and probably the primary one I want to mention, is the content management system that we're using. It's open source, it's PHP, it's not Drupal. We're using Silver Stripe. Has anybody heard of Silver Stripe before I mentioned? There's actually more hands than I expected. That's awesome. It's an open source PHP MVC framework out of New Zealand, like so much good software, and it's pretty neat. But there's sort of that big question: why aren't you using Drupal? Everybody else is using Drupal. Why aren't you using Drupal? Well, when I got to UMass, we were already using Silver Stripe. The selection process had happened already, and before we got to the point where we were like, yes, we need a redesign, there's that whole maintaining the site you already have thing. So I had gotten familiar with Silver Stripe and I found it's a fully capable system. It does everything that I need it to do. So there was very little push to change. Yes, it has a much smaller community. There are fewer other developers, fewer other modules out there to rely on, but we do have enough of a local skill set that if there's a gap in functionality, we can build it. We can build what we need and then push that back out to the rest of the Silver Stripe community. And, you know, I come from another open source community before this job, and I really like being able to contribute back to things. So, some of the reasons why. Our responsive design framework is the second technology, and actually, you saw this in the Phantom.js talk and again in an earlier Lightning talk. It's open source, it's grid-based, it's not Twitter Bootstrap, it's Zerb's Foundation, which I'm thinking is much less of a contrary technology at this point. So why am I using that and not Bootstrap, which is also used at my institution and other places? I feel that it's easier to customize. I'm sure some Bootstrap users could argue with me on that one, but I see a Bootstrap site and it's like, oh, yep, that's a Bootstrap site. That looks bootstrappy. And I didn't want to be locked into that. The documentation and the training available are phenomenal for if you want to get into using Foundation. You've got a pathway for it, and you know I've actually had training from Zerb on how to use their SaaS, and it was excellent. And I feel like there is a lower barrier to contribution in Foundation. I saw the Twitter Bootstrap contribution guidelines, and those were a lot of rules, all very good rules, but I've already had conversations with folks in Foundation about, hey, could we do this? And they have told me, yes, send us a patch. We'd happily take a look at that. So, another one. And then the third one I want to talk about is the search engine that we're using. It's open source, like everything is and should be. It's based on Lucene. It's not Apache Solr, although we do use that for some projects. It's Elasticsearch, yay. So why are we using Elasticsearch? It's just mind-bogglingly scalable. You can just throw hardware at the problem when things get bad. So we can start with something small and then keep pushing it, just add more as we need. It's in JSON instead of XML. I know some of you think XML is great. I think it's not as great as JSON. I think JSON's a lot better, easier to read, fewer bytes, personal bias. You're able to mix and match schemas. You can have different types of objects mixed together in the same search results, and you can query them together. You can have nested documents. You can have schemas within schemas and have those things just turn up natively. Baked in geospatial support, pluggable scoring scripts so you can focus on making relevance be what you think it should be. There's this concept of rivers where you can slurp in content from Twitter or your file system or MySQL, and things just automatically are ingested into Elasticsearch. Okay, so maybe this turned into a bit of a sales pitch at the end. I'm a really big fan of Elasticsearch, but anyway, so this is the stuff that we're using. Thanks for listening. You're probably better off actually just Googling these things. They're fairly common terms. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm not giving anything away. Don't get excited. I'm actually talking about a thing. I'm here to talk about a Rails gem called Browse Everything. Hopefully the name will become self-evident. It was developed at a Hydra Partners meeting, a developer hackfest in September 2013. The original contributors were myself, Carolyn Cole, Jesse Keck, Xiaoming Wang, and Thomas Schurz. But from a bunch of Hydra partner institutions. We've had a couple very major bug fixes and contributions from Banu at Notre Dame and some minor but important documentation and cleanup contributions from Jeremy Friesen and Chris Colvard. It was developed under the Hydra banner. It's under the Project Hydra Git organization, but there's nothing in it that's Hydra specific. It's just a Rails engine. You add the gem to your gem file, you add a route to your routes file, you configure it a little bit, which I'll show you in a second, and you're on your way. So what's everything? You can browse a server-side directory that's configured from the server side. You can also pull stuff from Dropbox, Microsoft SkyDrive, Google Drive, Box.com. It's all driver-based. Each driver is fairly small and handles its own browsing and selection logic, so it's really easy to add new data sources. Anything that can be browsed as a directory and file system, you can just do. So these are fake. Don't bother trying to use them for anything. This is the configuration file. I've got it configured right now with my to browse one directory on my server, a Google Drive. There's a Google Drive client ID and secret and a Dropbox app key and secret. If you were to use this for each of the services you wanted to use, you would have to get your own API keys and plug them into this configuration file that would be specific to your application. Then, this is pretty much all it takes to get it going. I've got a form with a button in it that launches, it calls the browse route, and there's some JavaScript there that hooks everything up on the back end. It's standard. It's written as a jQuery plugin. If you know how to use jQuery stuff, then browse everything will not be difficult for you. And here's the virtual demo. The demo app just looks like this. It's just a Jumbotron in Bootstrap. It looks like Bootstrap because it is Bootstrap. And it tells you to click this button below to start picking files. This is the host app. This is not part of the engine. As soon as you click that browse button, this is where the engine comes in. I've now selected Google Drive. It wants me to connect to Google Drive. I click that Connect to Google Drive button. It takes me to the OAuth screen for Google. It asks if I want to let this application browse my Google Drive. I accept it. It goes back, and suddenly I am viewing data, files in my drive. I'm going to get back to the layout of this screen in a minute and how much it sucks. But the dark line next to that first file means it's selected. I'm about to select that second file. I also go to click the Dropbox link, same thing. It wants me to OAuth. Here's Dropbox. My web connection is real fast, isn't it? I click Allow. It takes me back, and I'm browsing my Dropbox. That Code4Lib 2014 right in the middle is a directory. I click into it. I select the PowerPoint that I gave yesterday, and now down in the bottom you can see 3 files selected, 2 of them on Google Drive and 1 on Dropbox. And I click that Submit button, and it takes me back to my host app where I see 3 items selected. At this point, there is a hidden form in here that is populated with information from the providers, that won't let you retrieve the files yet, but it knows what files you've selected. It has some stuff that the gem can interpret. When you click that Submit button in your host app, it goes to a controller, and all I've had it do here, instead of retrieving the files, I'm having it spit back the data it received. These are the 3 files. It's an array, 0, 1, and 2 of hashes. Each one contains a URL that can be used to retrieve the file. In the case of the Google Drive ones here, it also requires an authorization header. And Dropbox just has this. It gives you your expiration. And so you would be able to feed these to a background process. And here's the repo. We would love contributions from a UI designer who can help us with that file browsing interface.
Wow. Actually, I would like a brain break right now. I don't know about the rest of you. That was great. However, unfortunately, we don't actually have a break in our schedule. We're going to move on to our presentations today. While this is getting set up. No, I'm not going to try any pirate jokes this year. Unfortunately for the rest of you, I actually never learned any new ones, so that was the problem. Nor am I going to do an interpretive dance. Can we see the slides in the video stream? Yes, yay! Okay, so we have Roy Tennant again.
Yeah.
Under the hood of Hadoop processing at OCLC Research. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cynthia. I was really happy to come to the hotel today, or not today, what am I saying, Sunday. Got in the elevator and I saw the sign that says, "This hotel observes quiet times." Going, I am so down with a nap in the afternoon, man. And then discovered, no, they meet in the middle of the night. Okay, come on. Oh, well. just want to mention I suffer from the opposite of imposter syndrome. So right about the time when I discover I know nothing about something is when I want to get up and talk about it. So my colleague who, if he's still here, Devin, are you still here? Devin Smith over there, wave at the good people. He's the one you really need to go to for details on what I'm going to be talking about. So he's right over there. So what is Apache Hadoop? How many people have worked with it? Good. That's a big number. How many have heard of it? Awesome. Okay. Won't spend a lot of time on it. A lot of time explaining about it. But one thing I wanted to say about it is that it's an Apache project that encompasses so many things. I mean, if you go to the website, there's like, I don't know how many nameable projects, software that exists under the Hadoop environment. So I'm really talking mostly about Hadoop core and also the Hadoop distributed file system, HDFS, and HBase. But there's a lot more else that you can talk about, like PIG and so forth. But first of all, MapReduce, because what Hadoop does is it implements an algorithm called MapReduce in software. So, as Wikipedia says, is a programming model for processing large data sets with a parallel distributed algorithm on a cluster. Okay, and what does that actually mean? It's broken down into at least two, and there could be more steps than this. There can be filtering steps and so forth. But we generally talk about mapping and reducing as two main things that you tend to do using this algorithm and this software. The way you need to think about mapping is filtering or sorting, so, or even just locating, if you will. So I'll explain a little bit more on some details of that as I go along. And then reducing is a separate step where it summarizes or merges the data that comes out of the mapping process. Hadoop itself handles like all of the underneath kind of work. So it marshals the servers that you have available to you, and you can just, have a cluster of any size really. It runs the tasks in parallel and makes sure that the I/O happens properly, the data is passed along to the next step, and provides fault tolerance. So if you have a node that goes out, for example, it can handle that. So quick history first. The OCLC research as an organization has been doing MapReduce processing since before I even joined in 2007. Tom Hickey and Jenny Tovas there actually wrote their own MapReduce code in Python. And so they had already had some history in doing MapReduce. So when Hadoop came along, we moved over to that. It was relatively easy to make the transition to that infrastructure. We have the hardware that we're using is a 41 node cluster, one head node, 40 processing nodes. I won't go through the details there. Just to say that there's a shitload of RAM and a shitload of disk space. As you might imagine, we need because we have multiple copies of WorldCat and God knows what else. And WorldCat now is up to 316 million MARC records. So how to use Hadoop? Well, it's Java native, so if you're a Java programmer, you're just golden. You can just code your programs and just run it within the Hadoop environment. I'm not a Java programmer and don't even aspire to be one, so the only way I can really use it is using the streaming option, which is basically in Hadoop, they just allow you to pass in your mapper, reducer, written in whatever language you want. And one of the beautiful things, because a lot of my colleagues use Python and I'm trying to learn it, doing my best. But Perl is I really think in Perl. So I like this ability of being able to maybe use a colleague's Python mapper, and if I write my own reducer, I might write it in Perl. And Hadoop doesn't care. You just pass it both. And so you can pipeline it through, different languages if you wish, which is really nice. And there's a ton of parameters that you need to pass into Hadoop, especially if you're doing streaming, so it can find the mappers and reducers and so forth. So generally speaking, we just have a shell script to handle all those, so it's very easy to edit and just kick off a job. So HDFS is interesting because what this does is it sets up the Hadoop distributed file system in such a way that you basically don't have to think about anything. So you can push your data into HDFS, and it takes care of chopping it up across the nodes. So you don't have to pay attention to how you need to do that. It handles all of that. And then likewise, when the data gets written from your programs out to disk, it goes into HDFS as well. And you don't have to know what data is where. You can basically just collect it all up out of HDFS with a simple file system command. So some of the very same file system commands we're used to in a Linux environment are available in HDFS. I'm sorry, in Hadoop and HDFS. You simply have to preface it with the word Hadoop, FS meaning file system, and then a dash and the command, like you see here, cat, a normal cat command you would use to, in this case, in this example, I'm using how you can cat part of a data file, pipe it to your program to test to see if it really works before you start, pounding on the cluster and really doing heavy lifting. And then, of course, at the end, when you're gathering up your data, that's the bottom one, you can just cat all of the outputs into a single file and have it there if you want. HBase is really useful for random access. So, in other words, if I wanted to find a single WorldCat record in Hadoop, I basically have to run a MapReduce job to go find it, which these jobs, I think we're now up to about half an hour a job across all of WorldCat. So kick off a job and it runs, and you'll see what you get back on a regular basis in just a minute. But it can take a little while. So whereas with HBase, the way we set that up is the OCLC number is the key. So it's a very, very simple process to just go grab that record, that single record. And that's what HBase is really, one of the things that it's really good at and one of the ways that we use it. Also, Devin, did you write this HBase Explorer? Yeah, great. He wrote a web-based application because I love web-based applications. I just love having the ease of going and looking at data from the web. So this HBase Explorer, you can go there, and the first thing you do is you choose a table that exists in the database. And I don't expect you to read all these, but I just want to give you a sense that we've got a shitload of tables, okay? A lot of data in HBase, and if we scrolled all the way down, we'd see like a couple versions of WorldCat. Maybe a native version, and then one we've enhanced even further within research with, other kinds of elements. So you select a table that you're interested in, and then I've skipped over picking the rows and columns. So you can actually pick which elements out of the table you want to look at, and then give it an identifier, in this case an OCLC number, and then you pull up the record. So we're looking at a MARC record within HBase, as translated by the HBase Explorer. So as you can see, the MARC record is just one piece of the data that we actually have available to us. We've got other data that we've added to it, conspectus headings, subjects that we think this thing is about, normalized date, other things like that. But then embedded in there is the MARC record itself. So to get back to how you actually do this, some jobs you want to do don't require a reduce step. So here's some examples of some things that don't require a reduce step, because you're basically just locating things that you want to do further processing on outside of the Hadoop environment. So for example, find all the WorldCat records with a 765 field because I want to do something else with them. And all that does then is it just writes out to disk. And then you can gather up those records and take them off and do something else with them. Or you can do a MapReduce job on them as well, if you wish, by just pointing the MapReduce job to that directory where that stuff sits. And I originally planned to do an online demo, and I'm really sorry I can't, but it was a matter of both the wireless being a little flaky and also the idea of having to come up here, log into my VPN, start up my shell, and all of that just would have taken too much time. So So here's just a simple diagram of the pieces of a map process only. You have your shell script, which tells the Hadoop environment where to find the mapper and so forth. And of course, the data then gets written out to HDFS, where you can collect it up and do additional work on it. Some jobs, many of them actually, also have a reducer component. And this is where the output of the mapper gets passed on to the reducer. So in this case, I'm giving an example of find all the text strings in the $650 $A. That's the mapping process, because you're locating the data, and that map process simply spits it out to the reducer, and then the reducer then could count up how many times that string occurs. And that's a classic reduce process, just summarizing output. So graphically, not much different. You just have an additional step that the reducer then summarizes, and then summarized data gets written to disk. Now, when a job is kicked off, there's this application called the job tracker, which gives us a whole lot of information about what's going on, and so you can monitor it. So if you look at the bottom red box there, that shows running jobs. So every job that's running, and we often have multiple jobs running on the machine. We've got, I don't know, at least a dozen people who use this on a regular basis. You can see that where it says map % complete, that gives you a sense of where you are in the map process. And then later, once the map process gets to a certain point, and that's configurable, then the reduce process will start. So you don't have to wait until mapping is completely done before starting the reduce, but typically you wait until it's mostly done to start the reduce process. And then the box at the top simply says, we've got 195 map slots, that is 195 map processes that can go on at once, and right now we're using all 195 of them. Okay. I won't show you you can scroll down actually, and there's even more detail. You can actually see much more detail, but I'm not going to go into that. And then you can also revisit completed jobs if you want. And there's an additional report that you notice the running jobs has a blue link there for the job ID. If you go there, you get a more complete report. And we also use that, for example, to sometimes that's all we need is to know what information is on that report, because we can send information to standard error and it gets put in that report. So if we just need a count, then we can just do it that way. We don't even have to look at the data on the disk. So here's a sample shell script. There at the top, you just see we're setting up some variables that we'll use down below. There's that one line which basically cleans where the output was. And then the bottom is the actual call to Hadoop with the parameters so that it can go off and do the job. Here's a sample mapper. Now, recently, just, I don't know, a month or two ago, I got in my head to figure out what the most common occurring title words were in our records. So since that's fairly easy to do, I went in, took a mapper that I already had lying around, and you see the elements near the top says 245A. So we're really just looking at the text within the 245A, and all this mapper does then is it just takes those words that it finds in 245A, or those strings, and spits them out. That's all this really is doing. Okay. The mapper, or the reducer then, takes that string of words, and do not look closely at this, okay? This is where I reveal just how bad I code, okay? Really, really bad code, but at least it works, okay? So this just takes that string, if you will, and splits it on spaces and, counts it up, okay? So when you kick off a job, you kick it off in your shell, and this is what you see. So as you can see, it gives you regular reports, and this could even be by individual percentage points. So it could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you just kind of watch this scroll off your screen. So if you want, you can kind of watch it going or you can visit the job tracker page and keep track of your job. And as I mentioned, these jobs can run up to half an hour or more. So the output of that particular project was this blog post where I noted the words that occur the most within the 245A. Turns out that new won. I think new wins for several reasons. One is that we've got a lot of government documents in our libraries, and we've got a lot of states with the word new in the name. Okay, New York, New Jersey, what have you. So that ends up probably skewing the results a bit, but nevertheless, that was kind of fun. So from conception to this blog post was part of a day, okay? So this infrastructure allows you to do some very interesting things, well, interesting in kind of a, whatever way, but it's just an example of the kind of thing that we can do with this infrastructure. Well, it turns out this got picked up by The Atlantic. This is the front page of The Atlantic's website on the day or two after I had posted my blog post. That article highlighted what I had found and called me out as a researcher. Wow, I'll take it. Pretty soon I'll be having doctor appended to my name. So anyway, that was kind of fun and wasn't expected, but whatever. We do serious things with this, okay? Not just fun things like that, silly things. This underlying infrastructure is what we use to produce things like WorldCat identities. Kindred Works, which is where you can come and find fiction based on genre. And if you, for example, like the book Twilight, if you scroll down from that book, you see other works that we recommend based on things like genre headings and things like that. So this takes processing power, heavy-duty processing power to produce. Cookbook Finder, okay, recently released this. So similar to Kindred Works in that we're trying to bring together similar records and provide a focused search interface on those. Virtual International Authority File, this is where we aggregate data from many, mostly national authorities that have information about individuals, various authors and so forth. And we aggregate all of those. As you can see, there's, I don't know, a dozen or 10, say, different countries that have a record for this lowlife here. Recently, I did a little bit of a project to really extract and expose what is exactly in our MARC data. So, for example, this is the contents of the $856.3 field. And I don't do any kind of normalization, so you'll see, for example, that there's going to be instances where if there's a period, it separates out from the text that didn't have a period. But I think it's important for us to see the variability within the data that we've got at hand today. But more importantly, we recently just announced, and it's still very much in the early days, and my colleague Richard Wallace has this blog post about it, is we've created work sets, if you will, based on Ferber, the Ferber concept. So we've actually implemented in software a Ferber algorithm which allows us to pull together the various instances of a work so that we can create a canonical record around a work. And I commend you to go look at this. We have a linked data explorer which actually exposes this works data as linked data. And so go take a look at that and see what you can find out, and there's a lot more there. So anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention, and that's how you can get a hold of me if you wish.
Unfortunately, no time for questions. So we're going to move on to Lucene's latest, 4 libraries, by Erik Hatcher. Yes. You have your slides?
Upper right corner.
This one.
Hi there, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be on the stage at Code4Lib again. I'm going to just kind of rapid fire go through changes that have happened since basically the last time we convened in Chicago on this most important library that many of our systems are dependent upon. Or rather, what I learned last night about Lucene. So, it's a full-time job to keep up with this stuff. Don't let anybody fool you. And it's not even my full-time job. I have customers I have to support and so on. And I have trouble keeping up with all of the changes that are going on. It's like drinking from a fire hose, like being at a Code4Lib conference. It's near impossible to keep up with what's going on here. There's a lot of magic there. We're barely going to scratch the surface of it. I'm just going to kind of highlight several things that I feel is important to this community, having been a part of it for a while. But there's much, much more there. I guess maybe before we get too far, I'll introduce myself. I guess I'm an old timer. I saw those tags, very funny. However, I never really worked for a library, just kind of in a library, so I'm kind of been on the fringe of it, looking at it from a Lucene and a Solr perspective there. Last year I did an update on Lucene and Solr there, and Lucene and Solr 4 had just come out. Very exciting times, a lot of changes in the core Lucene library, basically everything kind of gutted and optimized again, and Solr has some very dramatic improvements, including Solr Cloud, and lots of changes to support the power that Lucene 4 had brought to the table as well. Maybe just a show of hands, who is on 4X at this point? Probably 10%. How about the people are still on 3? A few 3. How about 1 dot something? A few. What's everybody else on? No. Okay, so there's a lot of various different versions that are out there, there's been no shortage of releases. There has been historically the feeling that Lucene didn't release often enough. I think that's no longer the case. Just since last year, 4.1 came out just before Code4Lib, then we had Code4Lib, and then 4.2, 4.2.1, 4.3 in May. In July, our company, LucidWorks, donated the Solr reference guide to the Apache project, and from every version since then, it's been an updated, very attractive, published, released, digitally signed and everything, released from Apache for that reference guide. And then you can see just more and more releases, October, November, February, any day now. It actually just got voted for 4.7.1, so it's tough for all of us to keep up with this stuff. So let's just take a look at a handful of things that have changed. One of the things I think is really important to search interfaces, and this is just, I guess, my opinion, my preference when I approach search interfaces, is to have suggest in there these days. It's very nice to drive the user into what you have available by suggesting things. Who saw the book bot the other day? Wow, incredible, incredible. Did you guys try to interact with that interface? No suggest in it, but it was pretty cool. It was very cool, but I was dreaming for the suggest in that interface there. Many new capabilities have occurred at the Lucene level. I'll give you some pointers at the end so you can look at some additional information about this suggest stuff. There's just so much stuff in there when it comes to the details of the suggester. Many suggesters and lookup factories and different ways that you can then tailor the suggest and get in-fix suggestions when the word's not necessarily at the beginning of the term and that sort of thing. So There is, when you come to suggestions, there's some even more advanced capabilities in there in terms of weighting the suggestions. You can do that with payloads. You can do that with expressions. Expressions is a new Lucene level module that allows JavaScript syntax to be incorporated into scoring functions. It's wired currently into Solar 4.7, as you can see there, for suggestion weighting. There is an in-progress issue to incorporate the expressions into more of the standard document search relevancy ranking capabilities there. So we'll see those that come in, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. Something that Solar has sorely needed for quite a while is a REST API to control it, using JSON, of course, and we now have that. In part, we have that for fields and copy fields. There is some overarching epic issues there to create more infrastructure to manage the entire Solar config, the components, and so on. Basically, every configurable thing in Solar to do this through the REST API. So that's a big plus there. Support came in different versions there. There was a read-only mode there for initially, and now there's a read-write capability for those fields. There's also I don't like the word schemaless because there's absolutely a schema behind everything Lucene from the bottom up, no matter what you're building on top of Lucene. However, you can put Solar into managed schema mode now and set it up such that when fields come in through documents that you can have these update processors that automatically create the fields for you. They'll do type introspection, create the fields with the right type, or will guess the type, maybe not necessarily the right type. This is where you have to apply some domain knowledge and maybe adjust the type after the fact and then re-index your content just like you do now. But there's some pretty clever capabilities in there to get you started there. If you're sending in basic numbers and dates and strings and text and so on, you'll get the types guessed fairly appropriately, and it'll look like magic that it just figured out what your field should be and defined your schema for you. So that's all good stuff there. Of course, tooling's going to be developed around all of these things, and in terms of managing the schema and configuring it and all that. Solar Cloud, maybe another show of hands. Who's using Solar Cloud at this point? Not too many hands there. If you're using Solar and you're using Solar especially, not even especially in any particular way, the Solar Cloud infrastructure now is seasoned. It's been out for the whole year. And I can assure you that many ginormous organizations on this planet are leveraging Solar Cloud in major ways. And once you get your infrastructure set up in a way that you can handle having some additional zookeepers, and if you're doing all of this Hadoop stuff, you are absolutely going to be running zookeeper infrastructure there, and get your wrapped around that you need to have redundancy, and you're going to have a few more servers than you maybe initially need just to serve search requests. But you're going to have that redundancy, you're going to have the replication, the kind of the near real time, and the ability to expand for growth and take advantage of the capabilities that Solar Cloud offers there. So as you upgrade from 3 to 4, investigate what it takes to run the Solar Cloud cluster, because you'll find the reliability and the stability there really top-notch. And there's a handful of other supporting capabilities there in terms of shard splitting, so that as your infrastructure grows, you can split shards and kind of rebalance things. And there's custom sharding support. You can direct updates to the right shard, and extremely importantly for many is the SSL support going along for the intra-cluster communication inside of Solar Cloud. So that just came out in 4.7. So all fairly new and developed stuff over this past year here for that infrastructure. In terms of querying, I just kind of bucketed these things out into categories here. There's a handful of new features there. There's a max score QParser plugin that's the max score def type, you'd say. In Solar Force 6, this is actually quite exciting and likely something that will benefit this audience here when you're dealing with hierarchical type information and you flattened it into Solar. You can group things, and there's been grouping capability in Solar. It has not scaled or performed as well as one would necessarily like. This collapsing QParser plugin is a simple mode of grouping in that you're going to pull out the top documents of each group, just one document out of each one of those groups. Faceting will operate on those documents that came out of those groups there. And it's high performance. So if you really just need to collapse on maybe dedupe on a particular key, or the best couple of documents, or best document out of each particular rating category, or so on, you can do all kinds of things there with that collapsing. There's another new query parser, the simple query parser. This thing just has very simple dismaxy looking syntax, but it doesn't do all of that dismax complexity when it comes to the QF and all that. So just a simplified syntax there. Some performance improvements when it comes to dismax. I know that's certainly a well-used query parser in this audience here. I just have some slides here just kind of mentioning miscellaneous things. There's at the Lucene level. Sometimes there are developments at the Lucene level that haven't bubbled all the way up into true Solar support. And maybe it doesn't even make sense depending on the particular modules, but this classification one happens to live at the Lucene level. There's some improvements in this posting highlighter. I think I repeated this about the suggester, so lots of suggester stuff. One thing I like, I'm going to actually show an example of this one, is the pattern capture group token filter. This is something I've used for some other demonstrations and for some of our customers, where the customer wanted to have entity extraction. When I drilled down, what they really wanted was to pull the acronyms out of some text and feature those as facets. And so there's some tricks that you can do where it's straightforward, just pulling out things that are capitalized, all caps, maybe with dots in the middle optionally, and so on. So you know, some very simple poor man's entity extraction type things can be done with regular expressions, as many of us have attempted over the years here. There's improvements in spatial, the new types of queries there, an upgrade to the underlying library there for that recursive prefix tree type. Some faceting improvements. There's some multi-threaded faceting option, especially when you're doing near real time and you are segmenting your index, and you can have the thread spread out across various segments and so on. And you can do faceting on a per field basis a little bit better with different options for different field configurations. Let's see, just more miscellaneous type things here. If you're using multi-core, there's ways to discover the cores without having to manage the Solar XML. It'll just look at a directory tree and realize that's a tree of cores, and each one of those cores can have a core.properties to have overrides for settings and so on. CSV, that's one of my favorite ways to get data in Solar. It's got some nice options there to kind of automatically unique ID rows and so on. There's an enum field. And back to the Hadoop capabilities, there's a solid Solar committer that's the kind of one of the key guys on the Solar cloud infrastructure that works for Cloudera. He's been putting a lot of the HDFS type capabilities into Solar, so you can store the indexes and transactions logs into HDFS, and you'll see that there's some map reduce capabilities as well. And for building Solar indexes offline using embedded Solar servers, so that stuff is now in 4.7. This top bullet item here, this is a big one. There's some really dramatic graphs that you can see that Haas published when he blogged about this particular capability here. Deep paging in Solar has historically been bad, and we've had many of your user interfaces, Blacklight, Viewfind, etc., that have kind of disabled the paging all the way to the very end of an infinite result set, basically, because it just brings your server, your Solar, to its knees. There has been a need to do deep paging, and that's been accomplished. It's a big deal, a lot of work that went into that, but now you can deep page into a search result set. Doc values is another very important one, especially for large-scale faceting. It's basically, instead of having to rebuild a field cache in memory, it's a field cache on disk as the documents are being indexed. So it's a much quicker data structure to bring to life, and there's different options to whether you bring it fully into memory when you use it, or it can kind of live partially on disk or in memory and so on. Block join, it's a nested capability that Lucene has supported for a little while. It's now surfaced since Solar 4.4. With block join, you can do nested documents, parent-child, do queries for children, return the parents, and vice versa. There are some caveats into how you index these things because they have to be literally in a block in the Lucene index. And of course that's going to have some implications when it comes to atomic updates. You'd have to atomic update the entire block, not just a single document when you do this. So there's some caveats, but it's cool that you can do hierarchical type things basically natively inside of Solar when it comes to some of this right here. One thing to point out, if you're still running Java 6 and you're going to be upgrading Solar, you're going to have to go to Java 7 when 4.8 comes out. It's been a community-wide decision to do that. That will be the next release after this week of Solar. Will require Java 7. Some things to keep an eye on: analytics component, more of this expression stuff. There's an expand component that partners with that collapse component to reinstantiate the children when you've collapsed things. So that they come out in the response. There's some highlighter work that's being done that seems to be related to this community here. There's some new joins capabilities there that are still in development, but they're out there in patch, and they're pretty beautiful things there. And I guess my goal was to kind of run out of time, so Tom Burton West didn't have a chance to attack me. But I could go on and on about thanking people for bringing me here and standing on the shoulder of giants. And anyway, I'll let those kind of go unsaid here. I do work for LucidWorks. We are hiring. We have a booth here. I don't know if you've talked to any of our guys, but we've had a few people here. We are leveraging Blacklight. Of course, we're doing lots with Solar. So we're kind of in the same thing. Go Who's, all right, Virginia. Right. I came here on Sunday and watched them win on Sunday night at the PNC Arena. It was beautiful. And for more information, I highlight Mike McCandless' stuff here because he's such a pervasive author of things about Lucene. He keeps it up to date. He's got benchmarks that are all the time updating. He's got a Jira search there that shows how the suggest stuff works. It's really, really nice stuff. By all means, take a look at that. And of course, the Apache information, the changes, the Jira, the reference guides, and our website. It'd be remiss, of course, not to point that out. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Mike Graves doing all tiled up. Just love that. Multitasking.
Okay. Just FYI, the feature I'm waiting for is the Read My Mind query analyzer. So, okay. 71. This is the average high in Raleigh for this time of year. So I would just like a special thanks to our hosts for making me feel welcome by bringing me some Boston weather down here. So I'm going to be talking today about tiling, putting maps on the web. I suspect, based on the fact that I'm standing here in front of you, there's probably a lot of you out there that have maps that you would like to put online. So what I want to do today is sort of give you an overview of a workflow and a set of tools that I think is probably going to provide a pretty low barrier to doing that for you. I'm going to kind of skip over the first step of digitizing your maps, partly because I don't have time to deal with it, and also because I don't really know much about that. Not that that's ever stopped me from giving an opinion about anything. But before I get into things, I want to start with a very, very brief overview of web mapping, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm going to start about 2,200 years ago. Thanks to the Greeks, we live in a round world. If only they'd left well enough alone, GIS would be much simpler. So it turns out that you can't actually put a sphere onto a plane without getting some distortion. And there are an infinite number of ways to do this. We call these projections. There's the only projection that we're going to concern ourselves with today is called spherical Mercator. You might also see this referred to as web Mercator, or by its EPSG code, or by its other EPSG code, or by its more different EPSG code. And I'm pretty sure just based on these last two, the EPSG is just trolling us now, because I can never remember what the order of those numbers. So there's a reason why spherical Mercator gets used. Well, there are a couple reasons. Some are better than others. But specifically, spherical Mercator and web mapping relies on a fixed set of resolutions, which you'll probably be familiar with as zoom levels. And so the way that this works with spherical Mercator, at the lowest resolution, the world will fit onto a single tile by 256 by 256 pixels. And the tile gets divided up at each zoom level into fourths, so it increases geometrically. And we end up creating a grid of tiles, and each tile in that grid can be identified by a zoom level and its column and row in that grid of tiles. So at zoom level 0 here, we can see the world fits onto a single tile, and that would be zoom level 0, column 0, row 0. At the next one, we see that the world now fits onto 4 tiles, and so like in that upper right tile, it's zoom level 1, column 1, row 0. So in this way, we can continue dividing up the world and take a latitude-longitude value and determine which tile to request at any given zoom level for that latitude-longitude value. And so I am going to get into MB tiles pretty soon here, which is what this talk was pitched as. But first, what I want to do is talk about what is a pretty common WebGIS stack. So the way that this works is usually you would have a geodatabase, which is going to be something like PostGIS or Oracle Spatial or ArcSDE. And then on top of that, you would have something that provides a set of OGC endpoints to your data. OGC is Open Geospatial Consortium, and they define a bunch of standards for interacting with your data, which I won't really go into, but it's sufficient to say that these standards allow you to combine and query and subset your data in lots of different ways, and they give you a lot of control over how you want that data presented. It's a really powerful feature of a GIS stack, and that power, unsurprisingly, comes with a lot of performance hit. So often what people will do is they'll also stick a GIS-specific cache on top of those OGC endpoints, or at least on top of some of them. And that's usually met by a tile caching server like TileCache or GeoWebCache, which comes bundled in with GeoServer. If you saw the Darren's lightning talk, he threw a slide up of their GIS stack at Stanford, and I've sort of provided a very abstract look at what a GIS stack normally looks like. His slide is much more true to the point. It's a thick stack. There's a lot going on. It requires a fair amount of hardware, a fair amount of effort to set up, to configure, and to maintain. When you need it, that's what you use, but in the case of putting maps on the web, sometimes this sort of thing can be a little bit overkill if that's all you're trying to do. So what I want to do now is sort of give you an idea of maybe if this WebGIS stack is sort of the Rolls Royce, and I'm going to kind of give you like the Honda of GIS stacks. So MB Tiles is a specification which was created by Mapbox, which is a company that does online mapping. And MB Tiles is extremely simple. All it is really a specification for storing tiles in an SQLite database. So each map gets stored in its own SQLite database, and there's really only two tables in this database. There's a table for metadata, and then there's a table for the tiles, the actual tile image data. And that tiles table contains 4 columns. One is the zoom level, the tile column, the tile row, and then the actual image data for the tile. So in this way, we can, since we know how to address a tile in that grid, we can pull the image data out of this SQLite database. So how do you make an MB Tiles database? So this is also created by Mapbox. I promise I don't work for Mapbox. But TileMill is an open source desktop application. It is a node-based application, and it's primarily intended for cartography. It's built on the open source Mapnik library underneath that does all the image rendering. And one of the great things about TileMill is it is super fast at rendering tiles. So it's pretty dead simple to generate an MB Tiles database in TileMill because that is one of the export formats that it uses. So all you need to do is load your geo-rectified image into TileMill, tell it what zoom levels you want to export, and export an MB Tiles database. And that's pretty much it for creating an MB Tiles database. Depending on the size of your map, this process can take as little as 15 to 20 seconds. So you have your map tiled and stored in an SQLite database, but you still need to put it on the web. All of the major web mapping libraries like OpenLayers, ModestMap, and Leaflet already support displaying a tiled map on the web. Usually for all of these, it involves some sort of variation of passing a template URL to the map, and it'll figure out how to request tiles from that. So here we see in Leaflet, it takes like 3 or 4 lines of JavaScript to add a tiled layer to a map. And the key there is that URL that has those 3 parameters, Z, X, and Y. Those are the sort of the placeholder that you pass to the library. And the library will figure out what to put in those. So that's how it's actually going to request the tile, and it'll handle filling in the Z, X, and Y parameters for you. So this is how you would sort of point your library at your database, but you still need to find some way to get the tiles that are in your database served on the web, because it's just sitting in an SQLite database. Of course, this is a pretty trivial thing to solve with the scripting language. It's just an SQLite database, so you can write your own script in PHP, Python, whatever, or you can use one of the many other implementations that you can find on GitHub that will serve your tiles for you. And you may also wonder why you couldn't just have your tiles sitting on the file system. So rather than having them in an SQLite database, why not just have that URL resolved to a tile that Apache, for example, is just serving directly off the file system? I call this the Dre gambit. And to be honest, this is not a horrible idea. In fact, how much time? Oh, that's someone's phone. In fact, I did this several years ago at UNC, and as far as I know, I think they're still using it, where I just expanded the tiles out onto the file system and had it served directly from there. This is fast, it's easy, it doesn't require any code to maintain, so it's not horrible. There are a few reasons why you might want to consider the MB tiles approach. Number one, it's an SQLite database. It has metadata. You can store metadata in it. I'm told that that's very important. There's the other thing to think about, and this was something that in my own experience can kind of be an issue, is that when you have a workflow of moving maps through this process, usually you're going to do the tiling on your desktop. So you'll end up with a bunch of tiles, but then you need to upload them to a server. If you've got a directory, that can be a little bit more complicated because you can't really upload a directory. You've got to zip it, and then once you get it on the server, you've got to unzip it. So the SQLite database makes it easier to deal with that sort of thing because you're just uploading a single file. There are a few reasons why you might not want to go with MB tiles or with this file system approach. The pre-tiling that we're doing is basically it's a very curated use case. What we're doing is we're sort of taking our data and putting it into a very specific presentation format. So some of the things that it's not going to work for, let's just go ahead and summarize. Right, so the process, the workflow that I'm sort of recommending here is load your geo-rectified map into TileMill, export those to MB tiles, make your tiles accessible on the web, and then point your web mapping library at your tiles. So the cases where this is not going to work so well is when you have vector data. What we're really talking about here is roster data. If you have like old historic maps or something like that, vector data is going to take a lot more work, and this is not how you're going to want to interact with your vector data. If you have lots of data, you might start running into problems. Since we're tiling, and you're tiling at each zoom level, as you can imagine, what you're doing is you're creating a separate version of that image for each zoom level. So the amount of space that this takes up does start to expand. So that's something to consider. The other thing is that if your data changes often, then this is probably going to be difficult to work because you're essentially creating a cache of your tiles. You're computing that cache and you're uploading it to the server. So changing data is going to be a little bit difficult to work with this. But once again, if you're talking about maps, that's probably not changing much. It's an image. It's there. It's not going to change. I guess the last thing that I want to do is sort of make a plea, because I know that there are probably many of you out there that are sitting on some really wonderful paper maps. And I would really love for you to put those things online. There's a growing community around the OpenGeo portal and the GeoHydra, a lot of the stuff that the Stanford guys are doing, where we are really trying to bring together a lot of geo data and get that on the web and share that. And so what I really want to accomplish today is to show you that it's not too difficult to start doing some of this stuff. And I would love to see this stuff online, and I would love to be able to point other people to it and create enlarge the community of geographic data that we have. So that's all I have. Time for questions? Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Everybody just wants to go home. All right. Thank you.
All right, so we are nearly there. We're going to have Tim wrap up before we finish, so I know we're standing between you and lunch, even if it's not provided by us. So I'll just be quick. Tim's going to do this, but I do want to thank everyone, not only the organizers, but also volunteers, and there's a lot of the hotel staff. And Tim's going to go through the whole list, but there's also the presenters. Of course, a lot of them who traveled a long distance to actually be here and present to us. And the lightning talk signups, thank you for being brave enough to sign up and come up here and be on stage, because we all know how nerve-wracking it really is. So I'm going to let Tim do the wrap-up, and then we can all go home. Oh wait, sorry, that's right. We have 3 more books, 4 more books?
Others are the ones you write your name.
Okay, so Michael's going to do book
if
giveaway.
anyone wants that 16-foot poster, you're welcome to carry it wherever you want.
You should raffle that off too.
I don't want to. Yes. Okay, so Tim Donahue, come get a prize.
Are you here?
Tim? Nope.
Oh no.
I should just read down the list. John Stroop. Bob Hashart. All right.
Hey, that's one.
Come get a book. Coral. Are you still here? Coral Sheldon Hess? No?
I assume that's in the no.
Ben Shum.
Yay, that's 2.
Jacob Reed.
Yay.
Natasha Nunn. No?
No? No takers.
Micah Cooper. How many did I say I had this time?
That is your 4.
That's 4. Awesome.
That is your 4.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for putting that together and running the book raffle. Actually related to books, just before I get off on stage. For those of you who are wondering how to get your free ebook from O'Reilly, there is slips of paper that are available at the registration desk for you to take. Otherwise, it's actually just a link so you could get it off of anyone else who just sends it to you. And that's how you get it. I think that's it.
Yeah, I had asked him to say a few words because I wanted to make sure something got said. And that is, I watched this process of putting this conference together from afar, and I've never seen a team work so hard as this one has in making a wonderful conference. And I want to call out 2 people and specifically who I think really deserve a lot of credit, and that's Emily Leinema, who unfortunately couldn't be here a lot with us, and Tim McGarry. So please join me in thanking them.
So before I go through a list of thank yous as well, we have some extra t-shirts here in both the men's and women's size t-shirts. So if you didn't get a t-shirt and you wanted one, please come up and rummage through the stack if you want to have one to take back. If you want one to burn Duke Blue, is that what you said? Okay. So please help yourself to those. I'm going to take them back to campus if they don't disappear. So, can you flip the slides real quick? So I'm going to have people stand up because I want everybody to see just how many people are involved in making this thing happen. So when I call your grouping, please stand up and stay standing until we get everybody through. So and everybody who's been local to the Triangle, who's been on the conference committee, just stand up, please. So keep standing because I want everybody in the room to see just how many people this really takes to put on. So those of you who are not in the local but were helping us with the committee, also please stand up. And I want to point out, just like we did for Riley, Carrie Gordon, who's also standing up in the back, has been standing up for most of the conference, has done an excellent job on keeping our stream going. So these are the other committees that we have on the wiki. So book giveaway committee, please stand up. Michael, you've been standing up a lot, and others. Keynote speakers committee. Some of you already are standing up. On-site volunteer committee. All those who are MCs, please. Pre-conference committee. Program committee. Tough up. Scholarships committee. All right. Social activities committee, Becky already left, but I know that other people are on there. Sponsorships committee, streaming video, t-shirt committee, all right. Voting activities committee, who runs the Diebold these days? Rossi's not here. The whatever committee, we still have that going on? And the Wi-Fi, electrical, IRC, streaming video, good. So all of these people have touched this conference in one way or the other. They've given their time, they've volunteered. You can also see, those of you who are first-timers, that you can do any one of these things to be part of this conference, and we really do need you to continue to be part of this process. And so as we hand over the keys to Portland for next year, please consider joining one of these committees. And I know Tom has already started the wiki to sign up. So just Google Code4Lib 25 wiki, and you will find it, and you can go sign yourself up. So please help me and thank everybody who's been involved. So Jen's in the room. So over there, wave again so everybody can see you. Jen is part of Concentra. She's one of the two that have on site. Debbie Smith is probably still over the registration desk. We could not have done any of this logistical planning with the facility. I couldn't have nearly pressured the hotel enough to get the wireless working yesterday, finally. They told me I have too much of a happy face whenever I come to this stuff. So, but thank you very much, Jen, and please pass this on to Debbie about how much work this is you've done and how much this has meant to us. So thank you very much. So I'm going to go through all the sponsors again, so please give you a round of applause to OCLC for being a platinum sponsor. And our gold sponsors, Blacklight, DLF, LucidWorks, Oregon State, and Penn State. Our silver sponsors, EBSCO, Index Data, Innovative Interfaces, Microsoft Research, and the University of Pennsylvania Library. Our bronze sponsors, Qualio Lay, Nashville Public Library, Princeton University Library, ProQuest, and UC San Diego Library. Our contributing sponsors, Cherry Hill Company, DuraSpace, GitHub, and User Friendly Consulting. And again, the first time this year we did our table sponsors who were out in Esplanade. I think it was actually a very successful interaction. So I want to thank Blacklight, DuraSpace, EBSCO, Innovative, LucidWorks, Microsoft Research, ProQuest, University of Pennsylvania, and User Friendly Consulting. So thank you very much. All of you have been just fantastic. I appreciate your patience as we got the internet working better. I appreciate all the feedback, the positive feedback. I haven't heard one complaint this week, and I really appreciate that. That means that we have worked, all the hard work that we put in really paid off. So thank you all the presenters, all the pre-conference volunteers. You have made this a success, so thank you very much. And off we go to Portland next year. I hope to see you all there.